Welcome to the Scoop podcast, where we talk all things testing, regulatory, and go-to-market for infant formula. I'm your host, Karen Breideman, and today we're going to talk about PER studies with our special guests, Satish Patel and Dan Merkel. Let's begin. Today on the show, we're excited to have Dan Merkel, President of Product Safety Labs, and Satish Patel, Business Development Director of Product Safety Labs, here to share with us their experience and expertise on running protein efficiency ratio studies, or PER studies, for infant formula manufacturers. Welcome, Satish and Dan.
Thank you, Karen.
Hey, thanks for being here. So let's start first of all with Product Safety Labs. What do you guys do there?
Karen, thanks. We appreciate joining you today. Product Safety Labs, or PSL, is a well-recognized CRO specializing in mammalian toxicology, in vitro, and genetic toxicology. We provide an extensive range of studies, from acute studies through to your long-term repro and general tox studies, as well as in vitro, in vivo, genetic tox, and biocompatibility studies. We do provide services for a whole range of industry sectors, from biopharma, medical device, chemical, crop, and the food industries. In the last 5 years, we've seen a tremendous increase in the need for our services by the food industry that submit to the FDA and EFSA. This includes full GRAS programs and also the PER studies that we're going to talk about today. It's probably based on the infant formula shortage currently and also the requirements of the FDA. We totally believe that PSL has great expertise and understanding of what PR studies require. And with my colleague Dan Merkel here and our dedicated study director, Jennifer Durando, can provide that expertise guidance to our clients on what their requirements are, the requirements from your side as well as our side for running the in vivo study. In fact, before we start any study, before we even generate the proposal, we will have a discussion with the client to fully understand the infant formula, the analytical requirements, and the mapping out of all the stages to a PER study.
Great, thanks for that set. So Dan, what is the purpose of a PER study?
The PER study is conducted to satisfy the FDA's requirement to demonstrate the biological quality of the protein in the infant formula. And to do that, we measure the amount of growth that's supported by that protein. And we do that by comparing that to a reference protein, which is casein.
And so how is a PER study conducted?
So to conduct a PER study, the simple answer to that is that we feed the weanling rats for a period of 28 days with a diet formulated with the infant formula and a control diet that's formulated to match that infant formula diet, with the exception that we replace all of the protein source strictly with casein. Mm-hmm. And casein's our reference protein. So that's what we're measuring growth against. But when it comes to actually conducting the PER study, it starts a lot sooner than actually the feeding part. So we need to go all the way to the beginning. They start with our Eurofins partner lab. They get their C of A. We need a full analysis of the infant formula, the actual lot that we'll be testing. Sure. And from that, we formulate these diets so that we can expose the weanling rats to the actual infant formula, but with adjustments to that diet so that we make sure that we're meeting all of their specific needs, because of course this test is done with the rats, and eventually we need to get it into humans. And then, as I said before, we match that control diet, and we match everything in the diet. The FDA wants to see not just the macronutrients, but also the micronutrients, all the vitamins, all the minerals, and any of the specialty ingredients that might go into a lot of infant formulas. Just some simple ones off the top of my head: ARA, DHA, nucleotide mixes sometimes. There's other ingredients that'll be added, and we need to make sure we match all of those so that we get a true control that's only looking at the difference based on the protein source.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So Satish, when a client comes to PSL requesting a PER study, what is the sort of procedure that you guys go through with the client?
So one of the initial conversations we have with the client is fully understand their infant formula, and that includes all the analytical data that they may have generated before we generate a formal proposal from PSL that will initiate our processes.
Yeah. Fantastic. So how long does a typical PER take?
So a typical PR study from initiation, authorization of the proposal to PSL providing the final report to the client would take 25 weeks. Mm-hmm. We know that it's a convoluted process to go from that first initiation to the final report. And clients, yourselves at the Food Lab, as well as us, before we initiate the 4-week study, have to navigate a number of milestones that are critical to the success of the study. And Dan, would you describe the path to a successful study?
Sure, Satish, thanks. Once we've gotten the proposal, the business aspects out of the way, we start, like I said before, with that certificate of analysis, with that full analysis of the infant formula that's going to be tested. And we have to spend some time formulating those diets, making sure that we get that match between the control diet. We'll work with the sponsor at that point, and go back and forth with them, explain to them what we're doing, any questions that need to be clarified on their actual product. And then from there, we put together a protocol, and we'll include in that protocol the recipe for those diets. We'll include what the targeted final diets are, any specifications for the ingredients going into those, because the FDA is going to want to see that as well. And then we include that C of A that they provide us. And then we'll also ask them to provide specifications for the product, not necessarily the analytical results, but the actual product specifications.
Sure.
The FDA has been very clear that they want to see that as well, because they want to be able to make sure that what we propose for diets and everything we've accounted for in that matching control is actually representative of the full product. And so we make sure all of that's in there. Once we've gotten through that process, we recommend, even though it's not a specific requirement, the FDA has been very clear that they do strongly recommend that the protocol go in for review. That actually goes in from the sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll be sending that, but we'll get them everything that they need. Sometimes they have other questions they want to ask, so they'll send those in too. And then the FDA will get back to us with comments, any questions. We'll assist the sponsor in answering any of those. We'll make any updates that are necessary to the protocol. And from that point, we're ready to go with the okay from the sponsor company. We'll go ahead and start diet formulation. Once those are done, so there's additional steps. We have to sample those diets.
Sure.
And we get those out again to our Eurofins partner lab. They'll do an analysis on the diets just to make sure that what we were targeting is what we actually achieved with both diets, because we don't want to go into the actual study and not have the diets that we intended to. So during that process, those samples go out for analysis, and that's also when we start to set up the actual trial with the bioassay itself. So we'll order those weanlings to come in approximately 3 weeks after the samples go out. That gives us time to send them out, get the analysis back, go over that with the sponsor, make sure we're all in agreement that we're ready to proceed. And then we start the feeding study. The feeding study is actually the easiest part of the whole process. I can even, if I just circle back a little bit, one of the things about that early part of the diet formulation is the challenges that we face, not just doing the calculations. That's in some ways somewhat straightforward.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that needs to be taken into account, because the way infant formula is made and the way that we're going to mix that diet for the actual study, there's a lot of vegetable oil that goes in as the fat source in infant formula, and that creates some challenges with the control diet. And so there's a lot of adjustments we make there. There's a really important match that we need to do, which is with lactose. It's specifically called out in the FDA's final rule.
Okay.
So they ask for all the carbohydrates to be matched, but the lactose is the key, at least with milk-based infant formula. There are some other approaches that can be taken for other types of infant formula, but that lactose is important because the rats are lactose intolerant.
Okay.
And so the purpose of that, and it's right in the FDA's guidance, in fact, is to make sure that we're not underestimating the protein quality in the infant formula by not having that same lactose present in the control. So,
right. So I suppose because the whole purpose is to show that the rats are growing at a good rate, and you don't want a lactose intolerant animal consuming a lactose product, and that
so it can
results.
be correct. So it can be a little irritating to the animal. So we go through an acclimation period to get them used to the diet. We Product Safety Lab's typical approach is to acclimate on the control diet. So that acclimates them not only to the lactose, but also the high fat content, which would be true of any diet, milk-based or not. And once we see that the animals are tolerant, if there's any animals that are struggling with that, they won't be placed on the test.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure that we're not putting animals that are highly sensitive. And then from there, we can go ahead with the study.
Dan, you've been talking about making a diet out of powdered infant formula. So what happens with liquid infant formula? How do you get that into a rat diet?
Sure. So the FDA does address that in their regulation as well.
Yeah.
If it's going to be a ready-to-use liquid infant formula, the first thing we'd have to do is, going all the way back to that beginning, is we need to do a freeze-dry process. We need to get it into the powder form.
Okay.
So different from the manufactured powder, we need to get that liquid into a powdered form, and it's that powder that we need to do the analysis on. So,
Gotcha.
so even if they've had their liquid infant formula analyzed, once we freeze dry it, we will need to analyze it again because we need to work on those numbers to formulate those diets.
Super interesting.
So
yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Sat, once the rats have been fed and they've passed their study, what's the next step?
So the in vivo phase is 4 weeks,
Mhm.
and then we start generating the full draft report. That normally takes 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and then we can issue that to the client for their comments. That's a draft report for the client. As soon as we get comments back, it takes a simple 2 or 3 days to finalize it before we give the final product to the client.
Fantastic. So overall, in the big scheme of getting an infant formula to market, what is the purpose of the PER study in the scheme of go-to-market plan? Why are we doing a rat bioassay?
Sure. So the rat bioassay is sort of the first step, right? It's one of the key requirements to confirm that the protein is, again, of a appropriate biological quality. But it's not just that; it's also to make sure that this infant formula, whatever the client has that they're going to be testing, is ready to go into the human infant growth study. We don't want to see an infant formula being fed to humans before we know that it's safe and that it's going to support healthy growth for them in the beginning of their life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's an important step then, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, that's great work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much for being here.
Right.
That brings us to the end. Yeah, absolutely. That brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Scoop podcast. Please rate and review us if you've liked this episode, wherever you get your podcast from. And we'll see you on the next episode.